So let's do some investigating. We just saw that in 1942, Hoover forced Prescott Bush to give up his active political support for his favorite young politician, Adolf Hitler. However, 4 short years later, he found another young man to sponsor in politics, Nixon, who is documented as employing Jack Ruby a year after this photo was taken. Nixon, who hired Hunt, who hired Connally, was created and sponsored from the very beginning by Prescott Bush. Are you surprised? Well, you better get over it in a hurry.
This barely readable piece of paper was declassified by the FBI in 1977 and released. It's a memo written by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. The title is Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is about a meeting that took place between the FBI and the CIA the day after the assassination.
The memo names George Bush as one of 2 CIA officials sent to get Hoover's report on the activities of the CIA's misguided anti-Castro Cubans. The memo was a scandal when it was made public in 1988 because it says that George Bush was in the CIA in 1963. It says that Bush lied when he told the public that he had no CIA experience before becoming director in 1974. It means he was in the CIA when he ran for Senate and lost in 1964, and when he ran for Senate and lost in 1970. And it means that he was in the CIA when Nixon brought him into the White House, trailing E. Howard Hunt behind him. In 1992, Bush was first confronted with this memo, and he had a chance to respond to it. Oh shit. Bush claimed that the memo must be talking about another George Bush working at CIA, because it couldn't be talking about him, because he had never been in the CIA. Except for that time in 1974 when he was director of CIA. Oh shit. Should we believe him? Let's make clear what we're talking about here. The George Bush of the memo, who received the report on misguided Cubans, was clearly a supervisor of the CIA's misguided Cuban operations. We've seen both the CIA and their misguided Cubans implicated in the Kennedy assassination. This is some important stuff, eh? The George Bush of this memo is directly implicated in the assassination. It makes a huge difference whether this was him or some other George Bush. But how can we know? Well, come on, it's basic stuff. Is there any corroboration? Is there any other evidence besides this memo to show whether Bush was in the CIA at this time, or that shows whether Bush was supervising anti-Castro Cubans? We'll start by looking at Bush's connections. A quick look at Allen Dulles may help us understand the importance of connections. Dulles worked closely with Nazi bankers during World War II. That somehow qualified him to become the director of the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. He was the architect of the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. When he launched the invasion against Kennedy's orders, of course Kennedy fired him. So thinking people were shocked when he was virtually put in charge of the investigation, the Warren Commission, because he was the prime suspect as the leader of the assassins. But he had been fired. He was no longer the head of the CIA. How could he lead anything? Because the organizing principle in secret work is that you trust only the people you know personally and are connected to personally. The CIA is not so much an organization as a community, so that it hardly mattered that Kennedy fired Dulles. The men loyal to Dulles, who knew him and trusted in him, continued to trust and obey. In fact, Dulles stood at the center of the group of men who not only had the motive, but the ability to steal the body from the Dallas coroner, to steal it from the Secret Service, mutilate it, and return it, all without attracting public attention. Was George Bush a member of this community in 1963, as the Hoover memo says? Well, did he have close personal ties with these people? Let's examine that question. Certainly one of Bush's main ties to this community is the connection between his father and Allen Dulles. In the 1930s and 1940s, Allen Dulles was a close business associate on a first-name basis with both Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman. Before that, during World War I, before there was a CIA, Prescott worked for Army Intelligence, a forerunner and parallel organization to the CIA. Through his closest associate, Averell Harriman, Prescott is also tied to Richard Bissell, the CIA Director of Operations for the Bay of Pigs, who was fired by Kennedy. Bissell, like Hunt, also worked for Averell Harriman for 10 years before joining the CIA.
Prescott also partnered with William J. Casey, director of CIA under Reagan, in 1962. At the time, Kennedy was moving to dismantle the CIA. Prescott and Casey together founded the National Strategy Information Center to directly fight against Kennedy's efforts. But at the center of Bush's connections in the world of secret murder and filth is his membership in the secret society of Skull and Bones, a secret Yale fraternity famous for its celebration of racism, robbery, and deaths. Averill Harriman and Prescott Bush were bonesmen. George Herbert Walker Bush was a bonesman, and so was his uncle, George Herbert Walker. Robert Lovett, architect of the CIA, was a bonesman, selected for membership by Prescott himself. F. Truby Davison was also selected for membership in Skull and Bones in 1918, the year Prescott did the picking. Davison was in charge of hiring for the CIA in 1948, the year George Herbert Walker Bush left Yale in search of a job. Davison had a son, Endicott Peabody Davison. Endicott was Skull and Bones, class of '48, making him brother under the skin with George Herbert Walker Bush. He's also the Bush family lawyer. As both former president and director of CIA, old Beelzebub himself, George Herbert Walker Bush is the most distinguished of modern bonesmen. But the question is whether he was in the CIA in 1963, as Hoover says. In a world where personal connection is everything, no one could possibly have a closer relationship to the head of hiring for CIA than George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush's first job on leaving Skull and Bones was to work for Neil Mallon, brother under the skin to Prescott, class of '18. In a letter to White House aide C.D. Jackson, dated March 26, 1953, the now Senator Prescott Bush described Neil Mallon as a very old and dear friend. I might say that Neil Mallon is well known to Allen Dulles and has tried to be helpful to him in the CIA, especially in the procurement of individuals to serve in that important agency. So George went directly from Skull and Bones. He went directly from being a brother under the skin to the son of the director of hiring for CIA to working for a recruiter for the CIA.
You could not ask for more powerful evidence that Bush was in the CIA when Hoover said he was. But you can get it. This letter records a meeting between Prescott Bush, George's CIA promoting father, Neil Mallon, the CIA recruiter, and Allen Dulles, the head of CIA, to discuss, quote, our pilot project in the Caribbean, unquote. In 1959, the year that Allen Dulles began planning the CIA invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, Bush began his independent business career as the sole owner of Zapata Offshore Oil. Zapata Offshore's oil rigs just happened to be positioned right in the middle of CIA operations in the area 30 miles north of Cuba near Cay Sal, an island used by the CIA for supplying the various terrorist raids of Operation 40, Operation Mongoose, Alpha 66, and the rest of these murderers against Cuba. The assassins of Operation 40 were supervised by E. Howard Hunt. Hunt was also a supervisor of the Bay of Pigs invasion. The secret code name for the Bay of Pigs invasion was Operation Zapata. Operation Zapata? Zapata Offshore? Now you could fairly ask what kind of an idiot would give a secret operation a secret code name and name it after his own company that was operating in the area. What kind of idiot? George Bush, that's what kind of idiot. In World War II, Bush named his plane after his wife, the Barbara II. When this plane was shot down, what do you suppose he named his next plane? Did you guess it? The Barbara III. While the CIA was preparing for the Bay of Pigs invasion, the CIA ordered a large ship from the Navy to carry tanks and guns and men to the Bay of Pigs invasion. But no one was supposed to know this was a U.S. Navy ship. The world was supposed to believe that these were just private citizens of Cuba, so it was necessary to disguise the ship and to change the name. The name was changed to the Barbara. Now, this is not a big deal. It's a small deal, but it's there. Bush has a habit of naming things in his military career after things in his personal life. He named 2 planes after his wife, and one of the 3 CIA ships at the Bay of Pigs was renamed the Barbara.
It's a small piece that just happens to fit perfectly with the bigger picture of Bush as a CIA officer working with anti-Castro Cuban terrorists. This same habit of naming things in his military career after things in his personal life also connects Bush's oil company, Zapata Offshore, to Operation Zapata and to the anti-Castro Cuban terrorists. But again, let's not overemphasize this name stuff. Finding the name of Bush's wife on a Bay of Pigs supply ship, or finding the code name of the Bay of Pigs invasion on his oil company, is a small but clear detail of this much bigger picture. The big picture shows us that at the same time that Hunt moved from working inside Harriman's office to go to the CIA where he supervised at the Bay of Pigs invasion, at the same time that Richard Bissell moved from working inside Harriman's office to go to work for the CIA where he became the director of planning for the Bay of Pigs operation, at the very same time the oldest son of Harriman's closest associate went to work in the exact same outdoor office where Hunt and Bissell were now operating. Hoover's memo names Bush as a CIA supervisor of the Bay of Pigs invaders, the anti-Castro Cubans. There can be no reasonable doubt about this connection. George Bush was working for the CIA, assisting in their operations at the Bay of Pigs, working for Bissell, working with Hunt, working with Sturgis, supervising the CIA's misguided anti-Castro Cubans. His supervision of Hunt and the others at the Bay of Pigs is a key piece of evidence linking him to the assassination, but it is not Bush's only connection to Hunt and the other suspects. After Bush got beaten up, losing 2 elections for Senate, Nixon brought his sorry butt into the White House, trailing E. Howard Hunt behind him. Haldeman says no one could figure out who brought Hunt into the White House, but it isn't that hard to figure out, because not only did Hunt and Bush come to work for Nixon at exactly the same time, but no one in the White House had any connections to CIA operations. No one had any connections, while Bush, on the other hand, was directly involved in the same CIA operations in the same area at the same time that Hunt was. And there's more to this story. Nixon's chief of staff says that everyone was astonished and flabbergasted in 1970, the day that Nixon announced that he was bringing John Connally into the White House as his Secretary of Commerce. No one understood the connection between these two, one the leader of the Republican Party and the other the leading Texas Democrat. Haldeman says, however, that Connally insisted that before they could hire him, they first had to get a White House job for Bush. Why? What is their relationship? What does Bush have to say about it in his autobiography? Not a word, not one. If he and Connally ever spoke in their entire lives, Bush doesn't mention it. How can you possibly explain the connection between these people? Do these guys have anything in common? The answer is either no, they all came together in 1970 for no apparent reason, or the answer is this one: they all met on the same road to power. And there's more to the Nixon-Bush-Hunt connection than that they came together at the same time in the same place. Remember when Hunt was sitting in jail demanding that Nixon pay him $1 million in hush money or he'd start talking? Hunt got paid. The money came from this man, Bill Leitke, George Bush's oldest, closest, and most important business partner. Leitke helped Bush found Zapata Offshore. And then, in 1959, when the CIA needed the company, Leitke handed the company to Bush, made Bush the sole owner, so Bush could carry out secret operations without any outside observers getting in the way. The fact that Bush's closest business partner paid Hunt the $1 million is just one more connection between Hunt and Bush. But wait, there's more. Remember this man? Leitke's money actually went to him, Ramon Rodriguez. He was a CIA-trained money launderer working in a Mexican bank, and he wrote the actual checks that Hunt received.
I made payments for the Watergate burglars, yes.
18 years later, in 1990, he was working for the main Colombian drug cartel when Vice President Bush sent this man, to ask him for $10 million to help pay for the illegal terrorist war Bush was waging against the people of Nicaragua.
Well, the only government mention that he made was Vice President Bush. The request for the contribution made a lot more sense because Felix was reporting to George Bush. Here you have a CIA guy reporting to an old boss.
Now, how did Bush know this guy? How did he know he had $10 million, and how did he know that he would pay it? It's a good question. Whatever the reason, the connection is still there. Bush is connected to him by this incident, and through him, Bush again is connected to Hunt. Two more connections between Bush and Hunt. It's starting to get ridiculous. Hunt's mother is not so thoroughly connected to Hunt. And now let's look at Bush's role in the cover-up. In 1975, the Senate Select Committee on Assassinations began to investigate the CIA's role in the Kennedy assassination. The committee uncovered the CIA internal memo that Spotlight magazine wrote about, which says that Hunt was in Dallas on the day of the assassination. William Colby was director of the CIA at the time.
Oh yeah, Hunt was there all right. He and Bush were in charge of the shooters.
And he was cooperating with the committee.
But they weren't really in charge. They were just taking orders.
And supplied the committee with the Hunt memo.
From civilians, like Allen Dulles and the Rockefellers. Maybe I
Colby
should shut
was
up
suddenly
now.
fired, and, out of the blue, supposedly with no CIA experience, George Bush Sr. was appointed to take over as head of CIA. Why? What qualified Bush for this job? One thing. Bush could be relied upon better than Colby to cover up the facts of JFK's murder because Bush knew that the trail led straight to him. He had to cover it up, and he did. He ended CIA cooperation with the committee and effectively shut down the investigation. The fact that Bush played this leading role in the cover-up connects him to every person threatened by this investigation. So, there's a ton of evidence that connects George Bush to John Kennedy's killers. But now we'll look at a couple of pieces of strange evidence that while they don't connect Bush to the killers, do connect him to the assassination in ways that can only be described as weird. This is George de Mohrenschildt. He was a wealthy, Russian-born Texas oil man who liked to party with minimum-wage clerks. He helped get Oswald a job at the Dallas School Book Depository. Of course, he was CIA. The night before he was to be questioned by the Senate Committee on Assassinations, his head was blown off with a shotgun. In his pocket at the time was an address book, and in his address book was the entry, Bush, George H.W., Poppy, his family nickname, 1412 West Ohio, also Zapata Petroleum, Midland. By itself, this proves nothing. Taken in context, however, it is one more amazingly direct link between Bush and the assassination. But that's not all. FBI documents record that, on the day of the assassination, at 1:45 p.m., Mr. George H.W. Bush telephonically furnished the following: that he recalled hearing in recent weeks, the day and source unknown, that one James Parrott had been talking of killing the president when he comes to Houston. Now what the hell do you make of that? Just crazy. When questioned about the FBI documents, Bush says he does not recall making the phone call. His failure to recall such dramatic events puts him into a unique club. Like Nixon and Hunt, he can't seem to remember the events of November 22, 1963. It seems that this guy was everywhere, connected to every single aspect of the assassination, planning, execution, and cover-up. No one, not Hunt, not Connally, not Nixon, no one on the face of the earth could possibly have better credentials as a suspect than George Herbert Walker Bush. The scale in this case is tipped past a certain critical point. The probability that he was involved is genuinely beyond a reasonable doubt. The Hoover memo is not circumstantial evidence, it is direct eyewitness smoking gun evidence from the most influential figure in the history of American law enforcement. The rest of the evidence merely provides a context for this memo that makes it impossible to reasonably believe that the former president was not involved in the murder of John Kennedy. George Bush is not like Nixon, a poor man's son who needs to kiss up to the big devils to get a place at the table. He was born with a place at the table, and with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was also born with a place waiting for him at Yale and in Skull and Bones and any place else he wanted. So why did he have to get directly involved the way he did? Listen, damn it, wake up. This is a critical question. Why would Prescott require his own son to get so directly involved in this stuff, to get so much blood on his hands, that his name turns up in a memo from the FBI chief entitled Assassination of John F. Kennedy? You answer that and you will have learned something. So, what's your answer? Well, you keep thinking about it, and then think about this. If you want to join the inner circle of a bunch of mafia-type killers, what do you have to do? How can these guys trust you to sit in on their private conversations where they discuss mass murder and single assassinations and know you won't rat them out? One way. They tell you who to kill, you do it, they watch. You don't have to pull the trigger. Just participate enough that you're guilty of conspiracy to murder, and then they watch you do it, and now they have as much on you as you'll ever have on them, so they can trust you. In order to join this club, George Herbert Walker Bush had to be directly involved in the murder of John Kennedy, and from that moment on, his political future was made. He was a made man. He lost the race for Senate, they gave him a seat in Congress. He lost again for Senate, they gave him a job in the White House. He lost the primaries to Reagan, they made him vice president, and he ruled while Reagan napped for 8 years.